Hello friends, so this is Dr. Neha Agarwal with the AIMS November 2019 Opthel Recall questions. The questions were relatively important. The whole of the ophthalmology came from the high yield topics, but yes, as usual, AIMS people were asking the same things in a different way. So let's begin with the question number 1. The enlargement of the blind spot occurs in all except. Now, I know your first instinct is marking the glaucoma because glaucoma shows the optic disc cupping. Yes, but not exactly. Answer is not glaucoma here. Now, I would like to show you something. First of all, the size of the blind spot depends upon the optic disc topography. Depends upon the optic disc topography. We all know that we have a blind spot, that is a physiological blind spot, and that is due to the optic nerve head or the optic disc, right? Now this means that all those people who have a normal size of the optic disc will have the normal size of the blind spot. All those who are having small size of the optic disc will be having smaller blind spot, that is smaller size of the blind spot, and all those who have larger size of the optic disc conversely will show enlarged blind spot. Alright, now let us see the list of the causes that shows the enlarged blind spot, and can you see here glaucoma is heading it. Now, what happens in glaucoma? We have certainly the cupping, we have cavernous type of optic atrophy, cave-like optic atrophy, cupping is there. Now, due to this cupping, there is less scattering of light. Due to this less scattering of light, it eventually ends up causing the enlarged blind spot. So, this is a very important thing, and whatever literature I have got, they all say, rather they say that one of the important visual field defects that we get in open angle glaucoma, especially in the early cases of glaucoma, is actually the enlarged blind spot. Okay. Now, if we come to the other option, papilledema. Papilledema, we all know that this is a known cause of the optic disc edema, and therefore it leads to the enlarged blind spot due to the large amount of the optic disc edema. And we know that the optic disc edema that we get in papilledema is about 7 to 8 times more than the optic neuritis. So, very specifically this will be a cause of enlarged blind spot. Okay. Now, can you see the third one? Third one is the optic nerve head. Now, if this optic nerve head is showing the drusen's, then this also leads to enlarged blind spot, and otherwise if it is surrounded by the medullated fibers, because medullated fibers are the myelinated fibers, these are the whitish fibers, and they are eventually leading to the increased size of the optic disc, and rest you already know that the topography of the optic disc is deciding the size of the blind spot, right? So, if there is enlargement of the blind optic disc due to these myelinated fibers, due to this medullated fibers, obviously this will also lead to the enlargement of blind spot. Okay. Now, other causes are optic glioma, if you have tumors. So, this means if you have anything that is abnormal and that is adding to the size of the optic disc, it can be the medullated fibers, it can be drusen's, it can be tumors, or it can be high myopia. Even the people who are having high myopia, why? Due to the peripapillary degeneration. So, that is also leading to increased size of the optic disc. So, if you come back here, can you see medullated nerve fibers can show you enlargement of blind spot, open angle glaucoma early cases can show you, and then papilledema is again a known cause. Now, like I always say, always go with the diagnosis of exclusion, and that is the easiest and the concrete way of answering the question of which you do not have any idea and you don't know the answer. So, you know this. Now, obviously, if you go with the common sense also, this is the hypoplasia of the optic disc. Hypoplasia means decreased size. So, if there is a decreased size of the optic disc, how can it lead to enlargement of the blind spot? So, clear cut, the answer is C. Optic disc hypoplasia will not lead to enlargement, rather it will lead to decreased size of the blind spot. Alright. So, this was the first question. Now, coming to the second one. Now, this was again a very important question, and amongst the high yield topics that I always tell you in the class. All of the following are used to control the raised IOP except. Now, instead of seeing the other options, without having any eye on the other options, can you see we have dexamethasone here. Okay, now dexamethasone is a steroid, right? And what I always say, remember GTCS, right? Remember GTCS, that topical steroids have a risk of causing glaucoma, and systemic steroids can cause cataract. Now, what type of cataract? Posterior subcapsular cataract. And what type of glaucoma? Secondary open angle type of glaucoma. So, this is always taught to you in classes, and you always know that steroids can cause glaucoma. So, obviously, it is not used to control the raised IOP. It is one of the causes of the raised IOP. Okay. Now, on the other hand, you have mannitol. Mannitol is used. It is a hyperosmotic drug. Okay. Then the methazolamide. This is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. This is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, you know. And methazolamide is a systemic carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. So, this is also used to control the IOP. Now you are left with the clonidine. Now many of the people were confused with clonidine. Now how can this be the answer? Do you know about the apraclonidine? Okay, apraclonidine. Then we also know about the brimonidine. Okay, both of these are the anti-glaucoma drugs. So in the same category, in the same class of the drugs, we also have this clonidine. We also have clonidine, though it is practically not used for the control of glaucoma, but theoretically clonidine is coming under the selective category of the alpha adrenergic agonist. We have ABC. Can you see? A for apraclonidine, B for brimonidine, and C for clonidine. So this is a well-defined anti-glaucoma drug. So this cannot be answer. Mannitol cannot be answer, and methazolamide also cannot be answer. So you are sure that dexamethasone is the answer. Okay. Now coming to some important details about this. Now can you see here what type of steroids are actually known to cause the glaucoma? We can have all the routes like topical steroids. The topical steroids are causing the raised intraocular pressure. Then we also have the periocular steroids. Now what is this periocular steroids? We are giving the injections, periocular injections. And these periocular injections consist of, first is the subconjunctival injections, then we have subtenon injections, and then we have retrobulbar injections. All these three comes under the category of the periocular injections. Even the intravitreal injections, this can also lead to raised IOP, and even the dermatogenic application of the steroids can also lead to raised IOP, where it is applied skin of the eyelids. So if you are applying these steroids to the skin of the eyelids, then this can even lead to raised IOP. So generally by all the routes, if you are applying the steroids, it can lead to raised intraocular pressure. Okay. Now how to classify this? Now if you see, what is the risk of the glaucoma? The risk of glaucoma is directly proportional to its anti-inflammatory effect. It is directly proportional to its anti-inflammatory effect, and 1 in 3 people, always 1 person out of 3 person is usually a steroid responder. Means every person has a risk, but every person do not respond to steroids. So those people who are responding to the steroids are called as steroid responders, and we have got 3 variety of responders. We have high responders, we have moderate responders, and then we have also have the non-responders. We also have the non-responders. Okay. Now can you see, only 5% of the people are actually high responders, maximum 35%, and 60% are non-responders. So maximum 60 plus 35, that accounts to about 95% of the people will not be responding so highly to the steroids. It is only these 5% of the people which will come under the high steroid responders. Okay. Now let us see one more important thing. What is the mechanism of action? Mechanism of action here. The mechanism of action of the steroids is, first they are depositing the glycosaminoglycans. These are the glycosaminoglycans. glycans. So they are leading to the accumulation of these gags in the trabecular meshwork. So obviously there can be trabecular blockade, and due to this reason it is causing the secondary open angle type of glaucoma, right? Then second thing, it is also decreasing the phagocytic activity which is going on in the trabecular meshwork. Now because it is decreasing this phagocytic activity that is going in the trabecular meshwork, what will happen? More of the debris will be present in the trabecular meshwork. Again this will lead to the trabecular blockade, and again this will lead to the secondary open angle type of glaucoma, right? Now what is the third mechanism? Third is, it is inhibiting the action of prostaglandins, especially which prostaglandins? E and F. Now what they are doing? This E and F actually are responsible for increasing the outflow facility. They are increasing the outflow. Now because it is inhibiting these prostaglandins which are responsible for increasing the outflow, again what will happen? Therefore there will be decrease in the outflow facility. That is why steroids are leading to decrease in the outflow facility, again secondary open angle type of glaucoma. So there are three mechanisms of actions which are actually responsible for the secondary open angle type of glaucoma, which is actually caused by the steroids, and as you can see all three of them is leading to the decreased aqueous outflow, and therefore all three of them are causing the secondary open angle type of glaucoma. Okay. Now, after seeing the mechanism of actions, how these steroids are actually causing glaucoma, I want to show you certain risk factors for the steroid induced glaucoma, all those people who are having more risk for this steroid induced type of glaucoma. Now, very important, first is your primary open angle glaucoma. All those people who are having the open angle type of glaucoma or even their first degree relatives are very high risk people who can show you the steroid induced glaucoma. Then the second one, the type 1 diabetes. Then third, the extremes of the age, like we can have very young people, all those who are very young, or all those people who are very old. So young people and the old people, and then we have high myopia. Even to a very lesser amount, we also have the penetrating keratoplasty, especially if it is done for Fuchs, for the Fuchs endothelial dystrophy. All those people who have undergone the penetrating keratoplasty for the Fuchs endothelial dystrophy as well as for the keratoconus. So these are the people who are actually high risk for the steroid induced glaucoma. Alright. Now coming to the next question. Now can you see here, identify the marked layer in the given histological section. Now the similar question came last year also, and I know you people face lot of problems in solving such type of questions, especially because they had given the cut section and they had not given the full picture. So let us see how to interpret such type of questions and how we can actually answer any question related to the retinal histopath. Now can you see here, they have given the arrow over this clear area, okay, where you can see large spaces, okay, while above these two you can see the nuclei, the darker area. So one thing is very clear from this, that this is the nuclear layer and this is also nuclear layer, and this means obviously in the center we have this plexiform layer, okay. Now I don't know, because there was a doubt that which layer was asked, but I am explaining you wholly how to answer such type of questions, even though arrow can be asked on the above layer or on this layer, okay. Now if you see, these are the darker cells which are showing you the nuclei, okay, and this is also showing you the darker layer, the nuclear layer. So both of them are the nuclear layer, and what is present in between the nuclear layer is the plexiform layer, okay. Now you have to judge that which one is inner nuclear, which one is outer nuclear, which one is inner plexiform and which one is outer plexiform. So this is a plexiform layer, and again then this is also a plexiform layer. So now you have to just see that which one is outer and which one is inner, okay. Now if you see this area, can you see this area? Here can you see the longitudinal cells? These are the longitudinal segments that are present. So this is actually the inner segment as well as the outer segments which are present in the rods as well as cones. So now you have got a clue or a hint that this is the outer side. So this is towards the outer area. So now I can say that this means this was your outer nuclear, this is outer plexiform, so this is inner nuclear and this is inner plexiform. Alright, so now you are very clear. If this layer is asked, then this is your inner plexiform. If this layer was asked, inner nuclear. If this layer was asked, outer plexiform, and then if this layer was asked, this is outer nuclear. Now how to interpret such type of questions, I want to give you a clue. As you know that we have got actually the 10 layers in the retina, right? 10 layers in the retina, and whenever such type of question will come, how to answer this, so you should have a very fair details in your mind. So if we start from out to in, if we start from out to in, which one is the outermost layer? The RPE layer. Okay. Now what is outer to this? Which layer is present outer to this? There will be choroid. So it is best if you are able to identify this choroid, if you are able to identify this choroid which is outer to the RPE, and usually this will be shown as a dark layer because it is a pigmented layer. So if you are able to see a dark layer having the pigments along with the vessels, because it is richly supplied with the capillaries, so you are able to identify the choroid, then it is very important that you are able to know that this is the outermost part of the retina, and next to this will be RPE layer. Now this RPE layer contains single layer of cuboidal cells, so you will contain a very thin layer here, and that will contain just a single layer, something like this, that is your cuboidal cells. So this is something how RPE will look like. Okay. Now the next one, if you see the next one, that is your layer of rods and cones. The layer of rods and cones actually consists of the inner segment and the outer segment. So this layer will show you something like this, longitudinal cells, right, which were seen in your question also. So this is actually the layer containing the segments, inner segment and outer segment. Now then comes your external limiting membrane. Now whenever we have a limiting membrane, this is actually separating the two layers. Which two layers? It is separating the internal segment as well as the outer segment here from the nuclei of the rods and cones. So on one side we have got the segments, that is inner segment and outer segment, and on another side we have the nuclei. Now here the layer of rods and cones contains the segments, so that means on the other side where we have the outer nuclear layer, this will contain the nuclei of the rods and cones. So limiting membrane is one between the segments and the nuclei of rods and cones. So this is containing the darker layer which contains the nuclei of the rods and cones. So one layer will be this one. This is your external limiting membrane, and then we have the nuclei of rods and cones. So something like this kind of a picture you are going to see. Okay, so this is your outer nuclear layer. Then we have the outer plexiform layer. In the outer plexiform layer, here you are having the projections from this rods and cones. So here you are having the projections from the rods, they are the pericles, and then we have got the projections from the cones also, something like this you are having. Okay, so these projections from rods and cones are again separated by a internal limiting membrane. Okay, now again I told you that a limiting membrane always separates from the nuclei. So this time again you are having the nuclei, but now you are having the nuclei of which cells? Now you are having the nuclei of the cells which are your amacrine cells, your bipolar cells, and then we have horizontal cells. Okay. Now among these three type of cells, remember bipolar cells are most important. Bipolar cells, because these are also our order neurons, they will be the first order neurons or they are the second order neurons, because you know there is two school of thoughts. Some people say rods and cones are first order neurons, and some people say that bipolar cells are first order neurons. Okay, so after rods and cones, the synapse has to build up to the bipolar cells. So that is why I am saying that especially important are your bipolar cells, and then comes your inner plexiform layer. Now in this plexiform layer again you are having synapse. I told you this will contain the synapse. Now this will contain the synapse between, one is your bipolar cells on one side, and if you see on the other side of the plexiform layer we have a ganglionic cell layer. So on the other side we have a ganglionic cell layer, therefore this will contain the synapse between the bipolar cells and the ganglionic cells, because ganglionic cell layer will actually contain the nuclei of the ganglionic cells. So that is very easy. Okay. Now next to ganglionic cell we have this nerve fiber layer, and what we always learn in the glaucoma, glaucoma is a multifactorial optic neuropathy characterized by retinal ganglionic cell death. Yeah, this was the definition of glaucoma. Why I always tell you that why there is a optic neuropathy whenever there is a glaucoma. There is a optic neuropathy because optic nerve is the continuation of this nerve fiber layer of the retina. And why there is ganglionic cell death? Because it contains the axons of ganglionic cells. So here we come to the axons of ganglionic cells, and finally we have this internal limiting membrane. This internal limiting membrane is formed by the Mueller cells. So I hope now this is very clear. Whatever be the type of picture you are shown, that is immaterial, but you can always see. Now let us try to read this figure. Now can you see this is single layer of cuboidal cells here. Now because we have a single layer of cuboidal cells here, so this is your pigmented layer, RPE layer, which contains single layer of cuboidal cells. Now what was then? The next layer was your rods and cones. Now can you see here in the rods and cones layer, can you see here we have got the segments. So these are the inner segments and the outer segments. So this will become your inner segments and outer segments. Then you have the limiting membrane. Now this limiting membrane was separating from the segments and the nucleus. So because it is on the outer side, so I will say now this is your outer nuclear layer. This is outer nuclear layer, and in between we have got this one, this is your limiting membrane. So I can say this is your RPE layer, this one is your RPE layer, right? Then we have the rods and cones layer, then we have the external limiting membrane and outer nuclear layer. This outer nuclear layer was there. Okay. Now in the plexiform layer we were having the synapse. Remember there was a synapse here. So they are synapsing between the different nuclear layers. So one on the outer side is your outer nuclear layer and one on the inner side was your inner nuclear layer. Okay. Then again we were having this plexiform layer. This plexiform layer was again having synapses. Synapses with what? On one side we have the ganglionic cell layer and on another side we again have the inner nuclear layer. So if you go back here, can you see here? Here we were having the synapse between the bipolar cells and the ganglionic cells because we were having the ganglionic cell layer on the next side. So this will be like inner plexiform layer. Here we have the nuclei of the bipolar cells. I told you it is mainly the bipolar cells, right? And here we are having the nuclei of the ganglionic cells, right? So in between we have the inner plexiform layer which will contain the synapse between the bipolar cells and the ganglionic cells, right? Then we have the ganglionic cell layer which is containing the nuclei of this ganglionic cells. Then we are having the nerve fiber layer. So this will be your nerve fiber layer, and then finally we will have your this internal limiting membrane which will contain the Mueller cells. This will contain the Mueller cells. So I think once for all now you know how to identify. So even if I give you only a small part, even if I give you this part, how will you recognize? Now see, this is again a darker part, can you see? So this dark part is a nuclear layer, this dark part is again a nuclear layer, okay? So when I am saying that these two are the nuclear layers, this is nuclear layer and this is nuclear layer, one is outer and one is inner. How will you identify now? See the segment part is the outer. So this will become outer, this will become inner. So in between the two what will be present? This will be your outer plexiform layer. So obviously this next will be your inner plexiform layer, and then you can go on with your ganglionic cell layer, with the nerve fiber layer, and then with the limiting membrane. Okay. Now see, similar picture is here also. You can get any kind of picture, but the fundamental will be similar. Similarly, can you see here, we have got this nuclear layer. This one is your inner nuclear layer, and then you have this nuclear layer. This is your outer nuclear layer, and in between the two we have got this plexiform layer right here, and above this will be inner plexiform. Now plexiform will lie between again the nuclei of ganglionic cells and the nuclei of the bipolar cells. Above this you are having nerve fiber layer, and again the internal limiting membrane. So no matter the color they have shown, similarly it is this. Now here you are having a better picture, because here they are also showing you the choroid. See this blackish area where you have lot of pigment, plus you can see the cut portion of the vessels also. So this area is choroid. So now you are very clear that this portion is the outermost portion. So here we will be having the RPE. This side will be the outer layer. Okay. Similarly, see this. Last time I think this kind of picture was shown. Again the thing is same. Now can you see this area? This is darker in color. So I think this will be choroid. Then you can see the dark pigments here. Because of these pigments, this layer is the RPE layer. Now RPE layer, towards the RPE layer, this is the dark layer. Okay. Now again you are having the two nuclear layers. So this will be the inner, which is away from the RPE, and towards the RPE is your outer nuclear layer, and in between the two you will have the plexiform layer. Okay. Then again you have inner to the inner nuclear layer, you have inner plexiform layer, which is again showing you the synaptic spaces. Then next will be your ganglionic cell layer, then your nerve fiber layer, and again one very thin membrane, that is your internal limiting membrane. So a very important high yielding topic. Now for the 2 consecutive years they have asked you the same thing in AIIMS, so I think this is very important, and the fundamentals are very clear. I have tried to collect so many figures so that you are not afraid of the color. See, color is not a thing. The staining may be different, but your layers will remain same. Now see, try to see this. This is again choroid. Can you see the large cut lumens of the vessels? So this is your choroid. So what will be this layer? This is a pigmented layer, single layer. So this will be your RPE. Now can you see the segments here, longitudinal? So this will be your layer of rods and cones. And again you are seeing the 2 layers of the nuclei. So towards choroid, outer nuclear, towards away is the inner nuclear, and in between outer plexiform. So above this will be becoming inner plexiform, and then this nuclei will be your ganglionic cell layer, and then next is your nerve fiber layer, and this very thin one will be internal limiting membrane. This is very clear now. Okay. Now coming to the next question. Now this is a very good question, and also it is a recent pattern type of questions that was asked in AIIMS. Okay. Now here they are saying true and false on glaucoma. The first thing is topiramate causes glaucoma. Yes, this is true. Topiramate can cause glaucoma. Which type of glaucoma? It is bilateral secondary angle closure glaucoma. Now how it causes glaucoma, what are the other ocular complications, we will be discussing this. Okay. Now second thing, topical steroids are contraindicated in the viral conjunctivitis. Definitely it is contraindicated. If you remember the dendritic keratitis, especially in the dendritic ulcers, they are contraindicated. In the viral conjunctivitis as well as keratitis also, it is contraindicated. Now there is a fear about the risk of glaucoma. Now there is a controversy here that whether it should be true or false, that definitely they are contraindicated in viral conjunctivitis, and definitely the steroids causes risk of glaucoma. Now should we mark it as true or false? Because maybe it is not contraindicated in viral keratitis because of glaucoma, but due to something else. We will come back to this. Okay. Now third thing is latanoprost. Now latanoprost cannot be used in the patients with asthma. Now this is again false. This is actually false, because latanoprost can be used in asthma, but with caution. So you have to be careful. It is actually the non-selective beta blockers which are mainly contraindicated in the asthma, and there it is an absolute contraindication we should not use. But latanoprost, that is a prostaglandin analog, we can use this in the patients of asthma, but you have to use it with caution. Okay. And then we have IOP. IOP decreases in pregnancy. This is again true. Now this is again true. Now let us try to analyze these options one by one. Now first of all, I am coming to the topiramate. Topiramate is actually causing the bilateral. It is causing bilateral secondary angle closure type of glaucoma. Now why this is caused? This is actually caused due to the ciliary body detachment. Either it is due to the ciliary body detachment or it is due to the cilio-choroidal effusion. The exact pathophysiology is that basically it is causing the forward dislocation of iris lens diaphragm. Now if you see the normal anatomy of the eye, this is the angle here, and then we have this ciliary body going like this, ciliary body going like this, okay, and then we have the lens, okay. Now whenever there is a ciliary body detachment or there is effusion here, what is happening? This whole of this iris as well as the lens area is coming anteriorly. Now because this is coming anteriorly, it is actually causing shallowing of the angle of anterior chamber, and therefore it is actually causing your secondary angle closure type of glaucoma, okay. Now second important thing, this is actually precipitated by the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So all those patients who are using already these drugs should not be given topiramate, okay. Now another important thing is that this attack is more common in females. The angle closure glaucoma which is caused by topiramate is especially more common in females. And when does it occurs? It usually occurs within 2 weeks of the treatment. Within 2 weeks of the treatment of this topiramate, the patient, who all those who are predisposed, who can show the ciliary body detachment, who can show the ciliary cilio-choroidal effusion, can develop this secondary angle closure glaucoma within 2 weeks of this treatment, okay. Now for all, what are the purposes of the topiramate? Why do we use it? It is actually a oral sulfamate. It is a oral sulfamate drug, and we are using this drug for the migraine in people, or we are also using this drug for the neuropathic pains. So if you feel like that patient is showing the intraocular pressure increase due to these drugs, or patient is on the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, then we should not give this drug, okay. Now coming to the IOP decrease in pregnancy. Now there are so many factors on which IOP actually depends, and one important factor is the pregnancy. So let us see how this pregnancy can lead to decrease in the intraocular pressure. First of all, this is mainly occurring during the second half of the pregnancy, especially during the second half. And what are the important factors which are responsible for decreasing this intraocular pressure? One very important thing is that there is increase in the aqueous outflow. So during the pregnancy, especially during the second half, there is increase in the aqueous outflow that will lead to decrease in the intraocular pressure. Second important thing, it is also leading to decrease in the episcleral venous pressure. Now when there is decrease in the episcleral venous pressure, what will happen? This will decrease the intraocular pressure. Conversely, why? Because if you see the flow of the aqueous humor, what happens? Either there is trabecular outflow, or we have got the second one, that is your uveoscleral, okay. We have got trabecular, or we have the second one, that is your uveoscleral. And in both the mechanisms, what is happening? It is going from posterior chamber into the anterior chamber through the pupil. It is going from the posterior chamber to the anterior chamber, and ultimately it is going into the episcleral veins, right? It is going in the episcleral veins. So obviously if this pressure is decreased, this back pressure will also decrease and the intraocular pressure will also decrease. And third important thing is that there is decrease in the scleral rigidity. There is relaxation of these structures, along with the fourth thing, that is your generalized acidosis. Though this is a minor factor, but there are four important things which are actually responsible for the decrease of the intraocular pressure. during the pregnancy. And how can we say that this is attributed to pregnancy? Because it is returning to normal by 2 weeks postpartum. So when it is returning to normal 2 weeks postpartum, we can say definitely that this decrease in intraocular pressure during the pregnancy was due to pregnancy only. Okay. Now, some important things. What are the other factors? Because this time they have asked you about the pregnancy. Now, next time they can ask you about any other thing which is controlling the IOP. So, let us see what are the factors which can actually govern the IOP. The first important thing is that it depends upon the axial length. So, I can say more is the axial length, more is the intraocular pressure. So in this way it will be more in myopia. So those people who are having myopia are having higher intraocular pressure in comparison to the emetropia or the hypermetropia. Then the second important thing is your diurnal variation. We have also seen that there is a diurnal variation in the intraocular pressure, and usually it is more in the morning. It is more in the morning hours. If you measure the intraocular pressure reading, if you take one in the morning and one in the evening, usually we have more in the morning. Why this occurs? Due to the high plasma cortisol levels. High plasma cortisol levels. So due to this high levels of cortisol in the morning hours, we usually have the high intraocular pressure during the morning. Okay. Then another important thing is your general anesthesia. General anesthetics will increase the intraocular pressure. Then supine position. The supine position will also lead to increase in the intraocular pressure. That is why when we say that this patient is actually having glaucoma, what we say, 2 consecutive readings at least 24 hours apart. Why? In order to avoid this diurnal variation, we take it as 24 hours apart. Then we also take it in the same position under the same conditions by the same tonometer and taken by the same physician or the ophthalmologist, so that we can avoid all these factors which can actually lead to change in the intraocular pressure. Similarly, then we have the exercise. Exercises can decrease the intraocular pressure, but that is only temporary. This is only a temporary decrease. So there is a temporary decrease in the intraocular pressure, and then ultimately we have fluids. Fluids can lead to increase in the intraocular pressure, and the example of this is our provocative test, the water drinking test that we do. In the water drinking test, what happens? There is an increase in the intraocular pressure. There is an increase in the intraocular pressure, and if it is more than 8 mm of mercury, then this is highly suggestive and diagnostic of your glaucoma, right? So fluid intake can also increase the intraocular pressure. Okay. Now a related question, topiramate causes which type of glaucoma? So topiramate causes, we have already discussed, it is the secondary angle closure type of glaucoma which this topiramate is actually causing. Okay, so answer will be D here. Now another important thing, because they have asked you about the raised intraocular pressure glaucoma, about this topiramate. So let us see what are the other ocular complications than this drug can cause. So I have tried to list them as ABCD so that you can easily remember. Can you see here? A is for the acute myopia. Because of the ciliocoroidal diffusion as well as the detachment of the ciliary body, it can actually cause the acute myopia. So A for acute myopia, B. B is for the blepharospasm. It can also cause blepharospasm. Then C is for crisis. Which crisis? Oculogyric crisis it can cause. Then D is for diplopia. It can also cause diplopia. And E is for effusion. We have already seen that it is causing effusion. So A for acute myopia, B for blepharospasm, C for crisis, D for diplopia, and E for effusion. Then it is also causing the nystagmus and scleritis. So these are other ADR, adverse reactions of the topiramate, that can be found in the person. Okay. Now the other important question, this we also discussed in the class, ETDRS chart is used for the evaluation. So I think this is very clear cut. This answer is here, will be the diabetic retinopathy. And diabetic retinopathy, as you know, is an all-time favorite topic of all the examiners. They always keep on asking about the diabetic retinopathy. And the most important chart that we use for the evaluation of these patients is the ETDRS chart. Okay. Now, what is this ETDRS actually? ETDRS means what? Let us see. ETDRS. Okay. So, what is the full form? This is your early treatment diabetic retinopathy, early treatment diabetic retinopathy study. This is your early treatment diabetic retinopathy study, and as I always tell you this, that according to this we have got 4 stages of the diabetic retinopathy. What is this? NPDR, then we have got PDR, then we have got diabetic maculopathy, and then we have got the end diabetic eye disease. So according to this early treatment diabetic retinopathy study, we have got 4 stages of the diabetic retinopathy. Now what are the other studies? There are 2 more studies. One is this, the name is DRS study, diabetic retinopathy study. The name is the diabetic retinopathy study. And then we have got one more study, this is diabetic retinopathy vitrectomy study, DRVS. The name is the diabetic retinopathy vitrectomy study. So you should know the names of the other studies also which are done for the patients having diabetic retinopathy. Okay. Now see one more question. What is the nerve supply of the marked structure in the given specimen? So what should be the answer here? Now there was a lot of confusion between the ethmoidal sinus and the superior oblique. I guess you know. So because they are asking the nerve supply, okay, so I think more chances are of superior oblique, and most of the people were agreeing with me that yes, it was the muscle that was asked, superior oblique. So we know that all are supplied by, now we already know that all extraocular muscles are supplied by the third cranial nerve. This is a very common dictum that we always study in the class, except for 2 things, that is your SO4 and LR6. SO4 and LR6. So here they are asking you the nerve supply of superior oblique. So answer will be your 4th nerve. So very clear cut, answer will be 4th nerve here. Okay. Okay. Now the next thing. Now this is your assertion and reason type of questions, assertion and reason. Now what they are saying, the topical steroids are contraindicated in the viral corneal ulcer. So this we discussed before also. Yes, topical steroids are certainly contraindicated in cases of viral keratitis, especially speaking the dendritic keratitis, right? Dendritic keratitis which is found in the herpes simplex. Because if we give this steroids in cases of dendritic ulcer, then this can lead to the amoebic ulcer, amoeboid ulcer, also called as the geographical ulcer, right? So this is obviously true. Now answer what they are saying. Reason is that topical steroids can cause increase in the intraocular pressure. Now both of these statements are true. The steroids are contraindicated certainly in the viral keratitis, and steroids can cause increase in the IOP also. Now let us try to see whether the reason is true explanation of the assertion or not. So for this, now see this. Topical steroids are contraindicated both in the conjunctivitis as well as the keratitis. First of all, whether it is viral keratitis or it is conjunctivitis, it is contraindicated due to the risk of the cataract, due to the risk of glaucoma, as well as due to the risk of increase in infection. So this is the part we were talking about, that yes, there is a risk of increased infection. So most specific would be if they say that it is due to the risk of increasing infection. How this infection is actually increasing? Because they are promoting the replication of the virus so that there is more of the corneal scarring, as well as they are prolonging the virus shedding period. So obviously there are more chances of infection, but you cannot rule out that yes, there can be cataract, there can be glaucoma, because now you have seen in detail how topical steroids, rather steroids by any route, can cause raised intraocular pressure and glaucoma. So yes, therefore I can say that both assertion and reason are true, and reason is actually not the true explanation of the assertion. Okay, why? Because why it is not the true explanation? Because actually it is due to the increased infection, and this increased infection is due to the viral replication, corneal scarring and the shedding period. So though it is causing the glaucoma, but it is not the actual reason, not the main reason why they are actually contraindicated in cases of the viral corneal ulcer. Okay. Okay. Now this one, the patient was given, and this patient, they said that this patient is having the diabetes. Okay, and patient having diabetes came with the decreased visual acuity. Now we have to see which lesion is this. Now first of all, there was lot of confusion which figure actually came in the exam, and I will tell you with respect to the two images, because there was a lot of confusion between two images. There was one set of the people who were saying that it was very close to this image. Now this image is actually a image of the fundus fluorescein angiography. Okay, fundus fluorescein angiography, and you can see that this is actually the optic disc. Okay, this area is the optic disc, and therefore this blackish area that you can see here, this is actually the macular area. Now macular area is actually seen blackish in color. Now normally it should not be much larger, as you can see here, because it is black due to the foveal avascular zone. So this should be blackish due to this foveal avascular zone. Okay, but can you see that this area is also enlarged? And how much enlarged? This area is enlarged because optic disc diameter is 1.5 mm, right? So 1.5 mm, that means it is 1500 micron. So it is much larger than this 1500 microns, right? So this area is enlarged and it is blackish in color. Now because this area is blackish, I can say that there is evidence of ischemia here, right? So there is ischemia. Now you know that whenever there is actually ischemia, what will happen? This will release a vascular endothelial growth factor, and vascular endothelial growth factor will lead to the neovascularization, right? And both of them are seen here. We have this hyperfluorescent area. This is your neovascularization, where we have lot of pooling and leakage of the blood. Okay, and here you have got a darker area that is showing you ischemia. So if this was shown, then certainly your answer will be your ischemic maculopathy. Okay, now other thought is that this image came and they said that ma'am, this image is quite closer. Now can you see here, again this area is your optic disc. Okay, this is optic disc area, and this area is your macular area. This is your macular area, and this macula is showing you typical the flower petal appearance. Flower petal appearance. And the flower petal appearance, as this was shown in the vibe also, this was covered in the classes also, fundus images that were covered in so many live sessions. This you know that this is very specific of cystoid macular edema, of the cystoid macular edema. So if this image was shown, then your answer will be your diabetic macular edema. So with respect to both the images, one is your macular edema, one is your ischemic maculopathy. Now I will tell you how to answer such questions. Sometimes when these type of questions are shown, you may not even see the image and you can answer. Okay, now let us talk about the diminution of vision in a patient who is having diabetic retinopathy. I gave you a chart also where I told you that you have to decide according to the sudden, whether it was sudden or it was gradual, if you remember, right? And in the sudden we were having again two things. One was your NPDR and another was your PDR. NPDR and PDR. Okay. In NPDR it was the maculopathy, right? And in the PDR it was your vitreous hemorrhage. Now this vitreous hemorrhage was taking place due to neovascularization, and neovascularization occurs due to the ischemia, right? Now this maculopathy can be macular hemorrhage or it can be macular edema. So you have now the options of hemorrhage also, edema also, and then you have ischemia leading to the ischemic maculopathy. Now try to see which is more common. Amongst these two, it is NPDR which is more common, right? Therefore, I can say that maculopathy is the most common cause of the diminution of vision in a patient who is having the diabetic retinopathy. Now, maculopathy can be ischemic, it can be edema, or it can be hemorrhage. Now, which is more common in NPDR? Which is more common in NPDR, hemorrhages or edema? It is the edema. And which is more common, NPDR or PDR? It is NPDR. So, I think answer is edema. It is actually clinically significant macular edema. It is the clinically significant kind of macular edema which is the most common cause of the sudden vision loss in a patient of diabetic retinopathy. So, in that way also I think the answer should be the diabetic macular edema, and if this image was given, it is very sure that the answer is your macular edema. Now, what is actually this clinically significant macular edema? Clinically significant kind of macular edema. I can say that this edema is clinically significant, number one, when it is at the macula, when it is exactly at the macula, or within 500 microns from the center of the macula. So, if it is exactly at the macula, or if it is lying within 500 microns from the center of the macula, and third thing is that the increased retinal thickness, which is occurring due to the edema, should be at least 1 disc diameter. Now, what was 1 disc diameter? That is your 1.5 mm, and 1.5 mm means at least 1500 microns, and 1500 microns you can see that it is actually even bigger than this. Can you compare the size of the optic disc with this edema? Yes, so it is definitely bigger. So, if it is definitely bigger, so that means it is at least 1 disc diameter. So, in this way we can solve the questions related to the angiography. For more details on the angiography, there will be a video just after this. You can go and you can see that video on the angiography, and there we will be discussing how to interpret the other conditions also with the help of this angiography. I hope you like this video. Try to see what are the important things and the important topics that we covered in this AIIMS November 2019, because all these topics are again important for your NEET also, and history has always shown that those topics that usually are covered during this AIIMS paper are usually repeated. The exact questions may not be repeated because pattern is different in AIIMS and NEET, but the topics are important, and you should always go through them. Try to see what were the problems that you faced during these questions. If there is any problem in the concept or anything that you would like me to help you with, you can always answer me in the comment section. Do very good studies and prepare well for your NEET exam. Thank you.